Moment here. Allow folks to join from the waiting room. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Garrison Institute Forum. I'm Stephen Posner, Director of the Pathways to Planetary Health Initiative, and today we're here to explore why ecological civilization and why now. Today's session is co-sponsored by the Pathways to Planetary Health Initiative at the Garrison Institute and the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed guests for today. Mary Evelyn Tucker co-directs the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, which examines cultural and religious values for broadened environmental ethics. She has published several books on Confucianism, including The Philosophy of Qi. She co-edited Confucianism and Ecology, published by Harvard, and 2 volumes with Tu Wei Ming on Confucian spirituality. She is the co-author of Journey of the Universe with Brian Thomas Swim and the executive producer of the Emmy Award-winning film, Journey. This was inspired by Thomas Berry, whose books she edited and whose biography she wrote with John Grimm. They have been traveling together, John and Mary Evelyn, to China since 1985, studying ecological civilization. Welcome, Mary Evelyn. And Peter Senge is co-founder of the Center for Systems Awareness and senior lecturer in leadership and sustainability at MIT. Peter has been at the forefront of organizational learning since publishing his classic text, The Fifth Discipline, which provided theories and methods to foster aspiration, develop reflective conversation, and understand complexity in service of shaping learning-oriented organizations and cultures. Throughout his career, Peter asks, how do we create the conditions for people to work together at their best, cultivating the innate systems intelligence that is our birthright but is all but lost in modern culture? And Peter has also spent time in China over the past few decades. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Stephen.
And Zhu Yan, an ecologist at Yale University and the Chinese Academy of Sciences. She is widely published in scientific journals on the environment. Her research focuses on mechanisms of species coexistence in biodiversity and forest ecosystem services. Originally from China, she seeks to bridge local ecological wisdom, such as the harmony between heaven and humans, and community-based practices with global scientific dialogue. She is dedicated to building cross-cultural understanding, advancing research, and sharing knowledge together with ecological environments. She believes that culture and nature-based solutions can reinforce one another for a more sustainable future of the mutual flourishing of all beings, and this is part of China's aspiration for building ecological civilization. Welcome, Zhu. And welcome all to the show. Thank you all for being here. Peter, I would like to begin by inviting you to share some opening comments and thoughts about ecological civilization in relation to organizational learning, business, or broader issues.
Well, thank you, Stephen. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's great to continue the conversation that we've been having with Mary Evelyn. And just a couple of simple kind of reflections, maybe help us start. The word civilization is one that we probably don't use very much. It's interesting to reflect why we don't and what it actually means. So whenever I hear the word, I always immediately hear an old line. I think it was actually pretty accurate. In one of his visits to London, Gandhi is asked, Mr. Gandhi, well, what do you think of Western civilization? And his response is, it would be a very good idea. So I think that we don't use the word much now because probably it's not very real to us. That's my suspicion. If you ask, what does civilization mean, or what sort of images and feelings does it evoke? I would guess for most people there would be things like art. Um, you might say the artistry of everyday life, the social quality of everyday life. harmony is a word that has a lot of meaning in the East, but not too much meaning in the West, because it tends to be heard almost as everybody agreeing with everybody, which of course has nothing to do at all with what it means. If you think about harmony in music, harmony is only possible because of difference. It's something beautiful that emerges from difference. So but that meaning is sort of lost in the Western meaning of the word harmony. But in that sense, I think that too would probably be evoked if we really ponder what civilization means. And this phrase, ecological civilization, which Mary Evelyn Jan will speak about more, is one that's been used a good deal in China for a long time. I suspect outside China it has almost no meaning. And we all know the kind of political intercultural reality of our two countries, which is really quite tragic. I had a young Chinese student come up to me after our talk, a student at Harvard. She was a graduate student. This was about 15 years ago. It really struck me. She said, I've been in the US for 3 or 4 years doing my graduate study. You're the first professor I've ever heard say something positive about China. It was heartbreaking. Um, so I had the good fortune to spend about a month a year for about 20 years in China. I had a teacher there, so that was the main reason for my regularity of being in China. But also got to spend a lot of time with a lot of Chinese, a lot of my closest friends. Um, and I think that the tragedy of this profound suspicion, and I think today it's probably mutual in some sense. I don't think amongst people, but people to the respective governments, um, is really sad. Um, so, what does the phrase ecological civilization evoke for me from the time I've spent in China? Um, it always kind of starts with the famous Western inscription, which Mary Evelyn knows very well. It's but actually pretty close to 1,000 years ago now, and it's a beautiful articulation of the essence of what I would call the civilizational ethic of the Confucian tradition. Um, we can do it by heart, but I know I'll miss it a little bit. Heaven is my father, and earth is my mother. Heaven is my father, and earth is my mother. And even such a small creature as I finds an intimate place in their midst. Therefore, that which fills the universe I regard as my body, and that which directs the universe I consider as my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companions. Uh, I believe it was called the Western inscription. At least this is the story I've always been told, because the author Zhang Jie, um, I think, was a government official, and he had it on his wall facing to the west. So I think it was that simple. Uh, but it's a beautiful evocation. If you just read that, um, you could imagine it coming from any of a large variety of indigenous cultures. Um, Maybe you could imagine it coming from some Western traditions as well. I think that would be a little more of a stretch, because that part about all people are my brothers and sisters, that's a sentiment you would hear frequently in a lot of Western traditions. Um, that which fills the universe I regard as my body would not. It would feel absolutely in line with most indigenous traditions. Uh, we have to remember that the older traditions did not regard intellect or mind, let's just say mind or consciousness, as with the brain. That's very much the Western view. Um, the oldest symbol for mind in Chinese uh, written language, of course, which is, stick figure drawings that evolve over time, is actually a drawing of the heart. So the idea that mind or awareness is centered here, not here, is much, much more real in Chinese tradition. And of course, many ancient traditions would consider awareness being centered here or here and here. The intellect is important, but as most of the ancient philosophies would argue, the role of the intellect is to serve the heart, mind, body system, which system is by its nature embedded, entwined, and in a continual dance of interaction with the cosmos. Gregory Cajete, who's done a wonderful job of synthesizing indigenous traditions of learning and education, says that as far as he knows, all tribal traditions he's ever studied anchor on three fundamental ideas. Individuation, he says, in the Jungian tradition, this commitment to being the uniqueness that I can be, but it only works in concert with community, which in turn only works in concert with land, the living presence of here. So you can hear those three levels of interdependence woven in the Western inscription. That which fills the universe I regard as my body, my total awareness. That which directs the universe I consider as my nature. This kind of direction of deep meaning, which is very much a heart-centered phenomenon. All people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companions. So therein you see this individual mind, body, heart system, social system, land, larger ecological system, all invoked 1,000 years ago. The thing that's often missed, and I know a bit about this because it was one of the main, one of many prime teachings of the teacher I had in China, which was to help the Chinese people initially appreciate that the Confucian tradition is, in fact, a cultivation tradition, much of which was deteriorated steadily in the last couple of dynasties. And then, of course, China's overrun by the West. Eventually, Confucianism becomes associated with kowtowing and adhering to various social norms, totally missing the kind of sentiment. If you think about those words in the Western inscription and just ask yourself the question, if we don't regard those just as nice ideas, but as lived experience, you realize that this is only lived experience in a lifetime spent of cultivating my awareness of myself as embedded in these layers of consciousness or life. So that's a very important point to me. It's the doorway to understanding ecological civilization, because it's not just a bunch of interesting ideas. It's not even just imperatives. Obviously, human beings are being taught right now in a very harsh way that we either live in harmony with Mother Earth or we're probably not going to live very well. So many of the stresses in our society, the fight over resources, the extraordinary movements of hundreds of millions of people around the world, creating tremendous political and social upheaval everywhere. We don't have to look very far to see the consequences, primarily because of ecological deterioration and climate change. It's not like people, want to move because they just want to move. It's not what's driving international migrations. So we're being taught, you might say, by Mother Earth, that you either live in harmony with Mother Earth or you really don't live very well. So to me, ecological civilization is almost a redundancy. What would civilization be without ecological harmony? So I think that that's the first point to recognize, that this is not a nice idea. It's not a romantic idea. It is a guiding idea when humans live well, period. No exceptions. The importance of that for our kind of everyday institutions, business, school, government. Obviously, I've spent much of my life working in these kind of institutions and trying to help them grow and develop to be places that people can really be people at their best. Um, it's first a reminder that just as I, as an individual, exist within this web of interdependence, so too does every organization. The notion that the purpose of a business is to maximize profit is a horrific and destructive distortion. It became popular in the 20th century when business schools started to develop and everybody had to teach the theory of the firm. And the theory of the firm starts with the purpose of the business is to maximize the return on the invested capital, which is a crazy idea, truly crazy. It's not the first time that crazy ideas have become popular. Um, Peter Drucker used to have a great way of saying it. He used to say, oxygen, profit for a company is like oxygen for a person. If you don't have it, you're out of the game. But if you think your purpose is breathing, you may have missed something. So, um, realizing that our purpose individually and our purpose in any level of an institution or enterprise, whether it's a school or a business, nonprofit or governmental organization, at some level, it always is about what does it mean to live in harmony with the larger social and ecological reality. There is no other living. It's not just a nice idea. So to me, ecological civilization is a simple way that the party in China, represented by the party, is attempting to kind of put a stake in the ground. We'll talk a lot more about this. Obviously, it's hugely challenging. Just saying it doesn't make it real. And like all the countries in the world, China has inherited the industrial age mindset, norms, institutions, international finance, and on and on. And the notion that infinite material growth is really the goal in a finite planet, which every kid by the age of 3 or 4 knows is fundamentally illogical, right? You can't keep putting more stuff in the same box. How do we think we're going to have infinite material growth on a planet that's finite? So the illogic of all this is deeply embedded in the industrial age. It gets inherited by all institutions in all countries. So China is wrestling with that like everybody. So it's not like this is just a bunch of good ideas and, oh, by the way, the party says we'll do it, so we'll do it. It doesn't work that way. The party does not have that kind of authority. No one has that kind of authority. So what does it means to actually lead in this direction is a profound question that all of us face. So thank you for giving me a chance to kick off. And I think, Stephen, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for so eloquently framing the question. I think just holding the question is a powerful way to lead forward. And Mary Evelyn, I believe you have a slideshow where you could share some more thoughts and remarks on this topic.
Yes. Okay.
And then we'll have time for all of us to dig into dialogue and respond to each other as well.
Okay. This one? This one? Okay.
Looks great.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Peter, for those wonderful comments and the Western inscription. Anytime it's mentioned in China today, people know it and love it. So it's absolutely at the heart of things, as you know well and express so beautifully. And next time, we're actually going to be talking, aren't we, a little more about Confucianism and the roots of all of this. So what a wonderful start. And thank you, Stephen and the Garrison Institute for helping to set this up. So grateful. And my colleague, Juyan, as well. So I'm going to talk about ecological civilization, the problems and promise, because from the beginning, as Peter also noted, there's problems. But what we want to do is say, what is ecological civilization for China? Because some people are talking about it for the West as well. But for China, it's an aspiration for the future, moving from an industrial society with unlimited economic growth that's polluting land, air, and water, to an ecological civilization that provides a basis for the well-being and health of both people and the planet. Let's see. So the modernization in China over the last 75 years is staggering. As we know, the Chinese government lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in a very short time. This was never achieved before in human history. So the unintended consequences of pollution of air and water and soil has caused all kinds of food safety issues, pollution, etc. So the movement then is a shift from industrial revolution to ecological civilization, a huge aspiration. Now, I've seen changes in China over the last 40 years, visiting Hong Kong and then mainland China. So from polluted cities to greener cities is absolutely the case now. There's still pollution of industries in the countryside, of course, and public health and land issues are there, but being addressed. Food, soil, and water safety is still an issue, but less than it has been. So the problems and the promise of ecological civilization, the challenges are, just like the West, ecological protection and economic development. This has been a dynamic since the Rio conference in '92, the Earth Summit. So there's potential, and yet there's inadequacies of EcoCiv because of the scale of China, 1.4 billion people, et cetera. And I want to emphasize this is a domestic policy for China for 30 years now. The foreign policy, if we start to talk about Belt and Road and economic development, it gets more complicated. And maybe we can talk about that in the discussion. But the promise and opportunity is also these Confucian values that Peter referred to, that there's intergenerational concern is very real. It's why these hands together of the elder and the younger is part of the aspiration here. Now, the shift that we have seen in Chinese universities, especially since COVID, is ecological civilization in ideas and practices at universities from the north, Datong, to the south in Pu'er. And these have included discussions of restoration, of organic farms, of tea and food. So it's very practical, along with the revival of Chinese philosophy and culture. I want to keep this dynamic, the philosophy and culture, ideas, but also practices. Now, there's also been a remarkable growth of eco-villages. This past spring, we went to Liangzhu, which is a UNESCO heritage site, an archaeological site and museum, which is 5,000 years old, one of the most ancient around the world. But right next to it is a Liangzhu cultural village. And there they have been working for several decades on a social contract for EcoCiv of mutual aid and participation. It's absolutely remarkable. They have their own environmental education and schools that they've started, a library and a community center where we show Journey of the Universe and 3 days of discussion and so on this issue. Very impressive. On the ground, this is an urban center, and we've also been to rural centers that are eco-villages. Now, I want to say, in addition to the government and society itself, some journalists, especially early on, helped to raise the consciousness of what was happening. This Under the Dome, an online program by this journalist, Chai Jing, was viewed by 300 million people. It's inconceivable in the West. But she showed by science and story the effect on her child's health. She held her baby up to the window in her apartment in Beijing. And her baby, her young daughter then, had never even seen the stars, much less even clouds, or the clear sky. Chai Jing traveled to London and to Los Angeles to see how the air was cleaned up there, both historically and in the modern period. So public awareness grew in China and beyond. This was taken down by the government, but they allowed it to go so that 300 million people watched it, and you can find it on the internet now. So ecological improvements have been growing over the last several decades. Air pollution is reduced, mined areas are remediated, there's grassland management. The Great Green Wall, a reforestation project, perhaps the largest in the world, is supposed to last until 2015, 15 million square miles to reduce the sandstorms in northern China, especially Beijing and so on. And this is true all over the reforestation projects. It's gone from 10% forest to 25% in a very short period of time. So the 7th largest desert in China, a third of the desert is now stabilized by vegetation. And this is research being done in the West. Now, if we come to climate awareness in China, 95% of Chinese people know that climate change is a threat to planetary well-being and that action needs to be taken. Nowhere in the West is that number even close. And that's because the government, of course, has educated the population on this issue. And our colleague and dear friend Wang Binbin at Peking University, who is a World Fellow here, she has done the polling on this and is working in an institute for carbon, net carbon, actually. Sorry. So carbon neutral goal for China will mean that The peak emissions will be reached by 2030, but they want to go to carbon neutral by 2060 in accord with the Paris Agreement. And this will lower global temperatures in the biggest single reduction ever estimated by the Carbon Action Tracker. Now, what I'm trying to say is when John Kerry and the negotiator for China came together for the COP in Paris and before, we knew we would get an agreement because this is the most important country for climate change and for change. And the changes that are happening, as we know, is towards renewable energy. Again, the largest on the planet. From unsustainable coal power plants, China doesn't build them overseas. Of course, they're still building some in China, and that's still a problem. But they are moving to solar panels and electric vehicles, the largest producer of these in the world. And as well, towards the renewing of human energy. They understand this isn't just a technical process, it's a process of a worldview that promises to promote a viable planetary future. And this is true, as you will hear in Zhu Yang's presentation. Even farmers who are doing reforestation know this is important for the country, but for the world. It's a very striking presentation she will be giving. Now, this paradigm shift, then, that's needed, again, Peter foreshadowed it beautifully, but it implies shifting from an anthropocentric to an ecocentric worldview in China and the West, namely from human-focused perspectives to organic, holistic worldview. It's a living Earth community. We're about to launch a huge website, a year in the making, illustrating this living Earth community from all species and ecosystems, where humans and nature are interdependent. So obvious in a way, but we've lost sight of it. So this anthropocosmic worldview that Du Weiming named in this way is a recovery of a worldview in which humans are situated within cosmos and Earth. This is needed around the planet, in Asia and the West, and clearly it's present already in indigenous traditions. Now, harmony with nature, this Tianren Hui that Peter mentioned, that humans are interdependent with the dynamic unfolding forces of universe and Earth. How is it we lost that? This is compatible with the sciences of evolution and ecology, as well as traditional Chinese thought. Confucianism, Daoism, and Buddhism foster this organic holism. Of course, it's an ideal, not always realized historically or at present. And the challenge of realizing this in urban cities, both in China and the West, is great. But Beijing is now 49% forested or parks, much more livable than 30 and 40 years ago. So the early encounter with China and Confucianism for us, John, my husband, and myself, our interest was sparked by our teachers, Ted DeBerry and Thomas Berry. They traveled to Beijing in 1948 to study Chinese culture, especially Confucianism, and then they taught us these traditions at Columbia and at Fordham from 1975. Berry, who's influenced many, many people with this deep understanding of Confucianism and Native American traditions. He had a history of religions program at Fordham where we met. He realized the environmental crisis in the 1980s. He encouraged our work in world religions and ecology. We couldn't have done it without him because he taught us the world's religions that he had studied for decades. And his colleague, and Ted DeBerry, who was a student of my grandfather's, a European historian at Columbia, was the foremost scholar of Neo-Confucianism in the West, many publications and so on, helped to create Asian studies in the US, especially through courses at Columbia on China, East Asia, South Asia, and through translations of the Asian classic. Because we had not just a bamboo curtain, we had a language curtain. We didn't have the translations of these classics until people like Ted in the Second World War went to Asia, to Japan and to China, and realized these cultures needed to be understood in the West. Now, Du Weiming, one of the great Confucian interpreters in the modern world, we can say a lot more, and we will next week. He's a director at Peking University of a Humanistic Studies Center. Was a research fellow and professor for 20 years at Harvard, helped us with our conferences there. And together we published these 2 volumes with scholars from China and from the West. What is this tradition? It's not just an ethics, it's a profound spirituality and worldview. And he was one of the first in this Daedalus volume that we did on the ecological turn of Confucian humanism and the implications for China and the West, identifying the comprehensive unity of heaven, earth, and human as a critical contribution to the modern world. And he was one of the key figures in the Confucians who came out of Maoist China to Taiwan and Hong Kong to retrieve and reappropriate Confucian ideas. In this lecture to 5,000 people in Beijing, he speaks with Barry in his mind as well. The creativity since the Big Bang has never been lost, but accumulated in every segment of the evolutionary story. Sun, earth, life, animals, and human were the inheritors of this cosmic energy, the qi that unites everything. We're charged with the responsibility to see to it that what has been endowed in our nature continues to give generative power to new realities and life forms. The eloquence of his language is stunning. Now, I'm coming back to a scholar official, which was the ideal of Confucianism, a civil servant, but also an educated intellectual, Pan Yue. We met him in 2008 in his office where he was the head of EPA, and I want to give a big shout out to Wang Zhehe, our colleague at Claremont, who's been indispensable in this work and travel in China. Pan Yue, who encouraged ecological civilization from 2006, he was head of Vice Minister of EPA, he's now Director of National Ethnic Affairs. He did a huge conference in Xinjiang in the desert area of the Silk Road that we participated in last summer. And he has promoted Chinese philosophy for ecological ethics. He has a PhD in the history of ideas because, as he said to us in 2008, that environmental laws in China can't be enforced without an environmental culture and values, a mindset. So he's been an incredible colleague in this work. And the idea then is that ecological civilization and cultural values from all the world's culture can inspire environmental ethics, both in China and the West. This is why we did the Harvard Project on World Religions and Ecology. 10 books and conferences, and the Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist books are in Chinese. This is the series that was trying to retrieve, reevaluate, and reconstruct these traditions for an ecological ethics, but that's culturally based and rooted. So to conclude, this shared planetary future that is still ahead of us despite great odds, we have the knowledge of science, of policy, of law, of technology, and economics to make the shift. We need ecological culture and values to create the impetus for ecological civilization to flourish in China and in the West. So we invite all of us to reflect on and join in the mutual efforts for the future of the Earth community. Thank you so much. Look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn. Wonderful. And Ju, we would love to hear your remarks as well. I'd like to invite you to speak about some of the ecological examples, especially your work and your experience with the forests in Beijing. And do you have slides that you can share as well? Great. And you're currently muted.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. Sorry.
Now we hear you and we see the full slide. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I would share 2 stories from my own work in China. By the 2 stories, I want to show ecological civilization is beyond technology. It's about values, culture, and people. It can link ecology, economy, and community. It's true win-win approach. It can make nature and people survive together. One story about Qianjiangyuan National Park. Qianjiangyuan is the origin of Qiantang River, which nourishes one of the richest regions in China. When I came here in 20 years ago, here the village is very poor. But what mostly struck me is local culture. Confucian culture is deeply rooted here. People believe harmony is the most precious value, and they have a very simple environment protection, such as seedling protection, festival, and maintain traditional forms of protection, including feng shui forests and Asian trees. They believe the harmony among people, harmony with nature, harmony within oneself is very important. So the culture of harmony was a fertile ground for ecological work. In 2002, my advisor came here and found a patch of old growth forests, and the local government shared our vision, so we stayed. In 2005, we established a forest plot here. That plot later became joined the Smithsonian Forest Geo network. Later became a model of Chinese large-scale forest plot that is Cipher Bell. At the beginning, our principle is people first, so we hired lots of farmers here. Some became farmer scientists and get a stable income. We also give children science talks, and local farmers themselves protect our experiments and forests. In the past, deforestation was very severe, so we did the tree planting experiments. So it required months of work. Almost every day, 100 farmers work with us. Several years later, the tree grew up. The forest began to recover. And we identified the effective ecological restoration models. It benefits both the community and the ecosystem. Our work attracts lots of scientists from China and also the international. Our work gradually influenced the government and the whole society. So in 2015, Qianjiangyuan was chosen as one of only one national park pilot in Zhejiang province. The government shut down almost 200 polluting factories and planned rules for protecting farming and tourism. Their goal very simple: let people prosper by protecting nature. Local farmers get ecological subsidies, developed ecotourism homestays and local products. One villages even covered their motto into the stone. Everyone has meaningful work, and every family has a stable income. So now the current average annual income now is eight times that of 20 years ago. And important young people start to return and instead of leaving. And the biodiversity has returned. Now we even have to watch out for the bears in the forest. And the local government built us a very beautiful research station. And our research station now became the model of National Ecological Research Station. And Qianjiangyuan also gives the experience of ecological conservation for the society, for the international society. Like Qianjiangyuan, now there are 49 national park pilots in China, covering 10% land and 80% species in China. A second story from Donglingshan Forest in Beijing. Here, two legendary ancestors of Chinese, Yan and Huang emperors, together defeat Ciyu. It is a very meaningful battle of Zuolu. And it brought people out of war into peace. So here, people very cherish the peaceful of life. And so they want to do more for the community and the environment. But for the livelihoods, here has a very heavy human disturbance. We conduct our researchers here very early in 1989, but most of researchers left because the grazing very serious. Even we established 20 hectare forest plots, but I choose to stay because here is close to Beijing. You know, Beijing, China have a very serious pollution. So in 2018, Ecological Civilization was written into Chinese Constitution. And the grazing band, forests start to recover. And the local farmers get the subsidies. They shifted to green economy, green livelihood. And the students began to join us for research. This video shows in 2021, the students, more than 40 students work with me for Donglingshan Forest monitoring. Sorry, it's just Chinese brain, no English brain. The last sentence is dream turns great. Yeah, in 2024, new highway make Donglingshan more accessible for researchers and educators. So here, not only the research space, but also education base. This video show the one of activities I hosted. I'm a volunteer in Beijing Dandelion School for migrant work families. I invited children together with Yale and Harvard alumni and their children in Beijing.
Okay.
They both enjoyed doing some biodiversity, and they learned from each other and benefit each other. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't translate into English. It's just Chinese. So ecological civilization is a win-win for environment and people. I work with farmers very often because I need work with local farmers for monitoring forest. So I know the farmers are working for a large good, common good, meaning ecological civilization is healthy ecosystem and forest restoration. Moreover, they are working for betterment of the country and the wider world. This is a culture influenced by Confucianism. This is the topic of the next webinar. Looking forward to your question and conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ju. Wonderful. I would love to open it up for conversation with the group of panelists, and I'm thinking about some of the deeper underlying motivations that we've heard about from each of you around ecological civilization, things like raising of awareness with journalism, education and sharing of cultural values across generations. It's such a powerful term and a powerful aspiration, ecological civilization. What are some of those underlying motivations? Can you say a little more about what is motivating it in China?
Ecological disaster. It's 1,50,000 protests a year on the environment. So it's idealistic, but it's very practical, clearly. And what Zhu just demonstrated is the ideas go through the society, the communities and villages, and so on, which is very inspiring, I think. Peter, I don't know if you want to jump in to respond.
Well, I think, of course, you're right. The ecological disaster is the quote burning platform. But I think the key to these things is always you have a motivation that's based on problems, obviously acute problems. In China, for example, there's so many studies of the health consequences of air pollution. People know, and it really was bad. I mean, you in Beijing, you rarely saw the blue sky, very, very rarely. I was in Beijing in 2008 when they had the Olympics. The number one issue getting ready for the Olympics was the pollution. And they literally shut down all the factories. This is what the party can do. They shut down all the factories within about a 300-mile radius, just closed them all for several weeks before. So guess what? You walk into Beijing during the Olympics and it was beautiful. People loved it. So I think there's something there also. Yes, acute problems tell you you've got to change. But at some point, aspiration has to succeed or succeed desperation. Desperation will motivate. It's like fear. Fear is a powerful motivator. But in order for it to continue to motivate, you have to keep regenerating fear. So you have to keep recreating problems to react to problems if your motivation is fundamentally reactive. On the other hand, if you use that kind of like a match to light a fire, what's the fire you're lighting? Because then you throw the match away. The fire you're lighting is that people actually like this better. You know, that little window around the Olympics, which went for about 2 weeks, and then another 2 weeks, about a month, because the Olympics are two cycles. They have the regular Olympics, then they have the Special Olympics, which is all the Paralympic stuff. So in that basically 3 or 4 month almost period, I can't tell you how many people in Beijing told me it was wonderful. We were out walking in the street. We were enjoying our gardens. So I think what happens there, it's just a small story, but I think something kind of gets ignited. And I think what the party did by finally articulating the ecological civilization policy or aspirational policy, really, is to say, we know this. We know that in the end, there's only one thing that will motivate this. It's because we really want it. Now, there's a logic that has to get corrected. And you said something very quickly in your slides there, Chuyan, which I think is worth underscoring, which is that little slogan, remember written on the rock? So that people have to kind of shift to a really, it's almost not the opposite logic, but it's an inverted logic. I mean, here's the logic of the Western model. You grow the economy, and if the economy is really successful, you have enough money in reserve to protect things. So then you can fund the EPA, you can fund environmental protection out of a healthy economy. And we know that logic very quickly because the very first thing that people will argue against when you say, well, we've got to eliminate this pollution, or well, what will be the economic cost? It always comes to that because the logic is economy first, ecology second. The slogan on the rock was the opposite. And I think this opposite is something that's deep in our kind of traditional wisdom traditions. If you have a healthy ecology, you can have a healthy economy. It just reverses the logic. So to me, there's two things I saw in your slides, which were great. One is you can start to feel the aspirational energy. This is actually a better way to live, period. And secondly, you have to invert the logic so that you have to actually start to have a logic and a society built around the logic that the fundamental source of well-being is ecological well-being, which then can lead to social well-being, which then can lead to economic well-being. We have the opposite in the West. The Western model is based on the opposite logic. So aspiration and logic is kind of simple.
Yeah,
Agree. Well put.
Now, even in China, it's still a big challenge. Not very easy. It's still very difficult. Yeah, yeah. But we even it's difficult. People I think can move forward.
Yes. I know this from Mary Evelyn saying it so many times. This is very hard for people to understand who aren't there. It's very inspiring to see the willingness of people to work on such a profoundly difficult challenge. It is incredibly difficult, but with the energy and passion they have because they believe it's the right way to think, it's the right thing to do. It's kind of that simple.
Yeah, yes. Chinese think is the right way.
That's right.
We must do that. We have no way to choose. Yeah.
And I love the notion that Peter put forward, it's the right thing to do. So there's an ideal and there's a practicality, tremendous pragmatism in the Chinese. I mean, but these go together. Someone asked about practice and theory. It's very mutual. Just as Peter said, the character for mind and heart is one. The yin yang is one. This is why I was trying to say this isn't perfect. Yes, there are human rights abuses there. There are human rights abuses in the West. I went to a conference last summer with John on human rights in China saying it's about responsibility, not just the rights of the responsibilities to a common good. This is very complicated, not simple, but
Yeah.
Anyway, appreciate the question, Peter.
Yeah. I think if we could just get the idea that, we're all have to work on this together. In a way, climate change is an extraordinary gift to humankind. It produces enormous suffering, but it's the first time in our history that we've had one problem. And we all have the problem. That's the question I wanted to ask you, Jan. You cannot build an ecological civilization in isolation.
Yes.
I think China's courage and leadership, against extraordinary odds is inspiring. But in the end, the thing that defines the modern age is we live in each other's backyards. The U.S. is an oil economy. It's always been, but now all of a sudden it's really evident. In the end, the power is so much based in the utility, coal, gas, oil industry. And so guess what? When you have real power struggle, the power shows up. That said, China, at some level, this is the problem that I've always wrestled with around seeing this movement towards ecological civilization, which is at some level, China cannot do this by itself.
Yes,
Stuck
it's
in
true.
a world with other countries which are very much don't have the cultural roots per se. They have the same needs, um, social and ecological. The populism and the wave of populism in the West is almost always being driven by extreme economic stress. We don't recognize it, but 100 million Americans live in economic risk. We are a society with huge social issues, and the anger about those issues fuels our politics. So that's the reality here. China's not living in a bubble. So the part of this that's always been the biggest puzzle to me, and I'm just curious if you have any reflections on this from within China. Yes, we need to step ahead. Yes, we need to do what we can do. Yes, we need to tap into our cultural roots and all the technology that we can muster and organize the will of the people to do what's right. And China is one country, a big country in a world that's not necessarily heading in this direction.
Uh, I feel ecological civilization, it's not a slogan, just not a slogan in China. It's true in practice. I believe the ecological civilization can make true in any places where people live, and just different traditional culture, different wisdom. You know, people can do their ecological protection together with their wisdom. Yeah, I feel it's climate change. Need all the people work together. Yeah, we people need to face that altogether. Yeah, not just one country, all over the world.
Yeah, and this conversation today, I think, is an example of some of the relational exchange that is really important for something like a domestic policy to become an aspiration for many beyond the confines of just one nation. The trade, the cultural exchange, the lessons learned, and it will look different, I imagine, in different contexts. So I'm thinking about how these lessons about ecological civilization in China translate uh, to well, what does it look like in practice in a different place? And are there other examples that we can draw from as well?
Well, I think it's a very important question, Peter. There is a group that's been meeting for some time to think about that question, but I want to say very few people know about ecological civilization in China. Some of the questions are terrific here in the Q&A. And there are people who've been working on this, like John Cobb, a process theologian from Claremont, and Zhihe Wang and Mei, his wife. They have been doing this for 30 years of bridging back and forth to China and the West. And there's a discussion group that Gus Beth and others have been part of to try and imagine what an ecological civilization would look like for the West. And I think this is a hugely important question. Some wonderful environmentalists have been on this. The Club of Rome has been a number of members, I think one or two are on this webinar. And so it's beginning to be seeded into the Western discourse with, again, the problems and promise. Is civilization the right word? Sometimes people prefer ecological culture. But the point is, this idea is synthetic for many, or integrated for many points of views. It includes politics and economics, and they are working on green GDP and circular economy in China. I hear it mentioned all the time, as well as the social, spiritual, and ecological issues. So that's the integrative process that's not really present in the West because we don't talk a lot about spirituality and values for ecology. Some of that's changing with Pope Francis, the encyclical on the environment. Of course, the religions are getting on board, but China is absolutely critical to this change. So,
and it seems like a key part of the motivational force is that ethical consideration, the value of harmony itself being a really core foundation for this this orientation towards ecological civilization. How can those values be transmitted? How are they learned? How are they shared among cultures and between generations? I'm just thinking about the pathways for the value of harmony to take root and to be shared in the world more widely.
well, our educational system is one, and seminaries are doing something on this now, finally. There's 30 graduate programs in religion and ecology that are teaching this. There are 30 graduates from Yale who are speaking about it in interviews very inspiringly. It's going to take a long time, though. It's going to take a long, long time. Gandhi's liberation of India took decades, drawing on his Hinduism and nonviolence. So we have a long road ahead. But we have to, as Peter said eloquently, we have to do it with China, not against China.
I feel if people want to learn, yeah, they will look for lots of resources about that. If they don't want to learn, it's very difficult to.
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably a very important point for the present moment. You could say that, in some sense, the biggest obstacle, I'll just speak now as a citizen of the United States, was complacency. You know, for so long, several generations, certainly since World War II, kind of grew up with this idea that the United States is the best country in the world. It's the richest country in the world. Everybody wants to live in America. Everybody wants to live like Americans. And I think that now that complacency is being shattered. You know, you might say it's sort of analogous to the air pollution in Beijing. We have a pollution of the social fabric right now that people cannot deny any more than you could deny the quality of the air in Beijing. The quality of our social air is horrific, and it pains people deeply. And of course, like the quality of the air in Beijing, you could kind of put on a mask, which many people did, and you could just kind of carry on your business. But at another level, you know in your heart that this is not the way to live. I think right now, more and more people in the United States realize that what we have right now is not a way to live. So while it's painful, it might be part of our awakening that an economy, a society that rules itself based on GDP, will end up with a bunch of people who don't know who they are and don't really like each other very much and don't trust each other very much. But, you know, trust is the fabric of all societies, ultimately. And if you lose that, you really don't have much. And I think you can say, well, we've got all this money and we've got all these goodies and we've got the internet and we've got AI. Isn't that interesting? Well, maybe AI won't need us, whatever. I mean, we have a society right now that's predisposed to fear and paranoia. So it's quite analogous to the air pollution in Beijing. So I think that at some point you need to wake up to the point where you just can't keep going like this. So anyhow, that to me is the one thing that I would say is paradoxically hopeful in the present situation here. The complacency that really sat in the background, in my experience from moving all around the world in the US culture, is now been shattered. So that will always produce more fear. The paranoia creates more paranoia. But also there's a background of going, well, this probably is not going to work. Something will have to change. I think in times like that, as it even was in China, young people are really important because usually it's the young people who get the most angry by something that's just plain wrong. Obviously, they can't change things by themselves, but their voice and their spirit is really important. So I'm kind of interested to see if we will have a kind of reckoning, you might say, of young people saying, well, yeah, I can play on my gadget all day long, but it's really not a very good way to live.
Yeah, timely with today being the first day of high school for one of my children here at home, and the no phone policy taking place and unfolding in schools in Vermont. One of the questions that was shared by a participant is around language. I really like this. They're struck by how some of the challenges we face are based on the language of separation, the subject-object orientation of some languages, and how that makes it easier to go to domination rather than harmony.
Yes.
And are there examples of ways in which this language challenge is being taken on?
I think that's such an important point, Peter, because having been in what I would call secular academia for more than 40 years, maybe 45, I don't know. But, you can't really mention much about ethics and values. Our wonderful School of the Environment, with tremendous leaders, and has contributed so much to the environmental movement in this country and around the world. A third of our students are international, and what Gus Beth did for our school is absolutely amazing. But I would still say we can't talk about something like, in a public setting, values, ethics, culture even, or spirituality. And the first time I said something about the sacred was my last talk at years ago. Really? So the language thing is so important. It is really, really important because of this division, science, literature, spiritual. I love your laughter, Peter. Continue to.
Well, I was thinking of, Emerson gave that famous talk at Harvard. I think it was like 1835. They didn't invite him back for 30 years. And it was at the Divinity School. And he said, the Divinity School is really missing the point of the beauty of harmony of nature. So it's a good compliment to not be
Well,
invited.
actually, the point I should say, just to finish that though, is the next generation, back to your and Peter's points, the next generation is all over this. They love it. They see the fusion. They see we can't do this without values. But it is going to take, again, to your point, Peter, that the divisions are so huge, but the bridges are possible, I think, if we build them with respect for one another and with reverence, dare I say, for the natural world as a living Earth community, not dead, not mechanistic processes. And that is really important.
And you see, I think that language is always being constrained or enabled by culture and habit, in the sense of what's traditional. The word spirit and spiritual, I learned long ago, was never a problem in China. People never had a problem. It was a big problem in the West. And that's simply because in the history of our religious institutions, spirit and religious institution became connected. So you couldn't say one without evoking an image of the other. So I think if you turn that around, you said something really, I think, important midway in your comments when you said we will have, and I asked you the question, you responded, you said, countries will have to find their own wisdom. See, I think wisdom is a little different word than spirit or spiritual, but it'll move us in the same direction. I think you're absolutely right. We have to find within ourselves our own wisdom traditions. Confucianism is a great example of China's kind of deep wisdom tradition. We have those. They're not, they can't be tangled up with the church per se, although even the church, of course, has great moments when it shows us. But still, because there's so much fear embedded, Europeans are, if anything, even more extreme than Americans, with the domination and exploitation of power by the historical church. But wisdom is a different word. I think if we start to, I think that's a great question about language. We look, what are the words that evoke the right kinds of deep orientation and imagination? what are our wisdom traditions? Which was the word you used, which I thought that is a very interesting word.
Well, I think we have to we have to draw on both the religious traditions, which 80% of the world's people still have some affiliation according to polls, et cetera, but also on something beside or beyond the religious traditions, be they institutional or textual or whatever, because the next generation is deeply inspired by their own spiritual seeking. It's why we made Journey of the Universe, to bring together science and a humanistic and spiritual view. I mean, if you saw Due Ming's term now is spiritual humanism, and the Dalai Lama is using something very similar. And this is absolutely essential for a language that's going to reach to the next generation. And I want to lift up the yin yang, not the either or, but spirit and matter in Chinese tradition is one. It's qi. It's matter and energy that infuses the universe, earth systems, and our cells. And why is Tai Chi, Qigong, traditional Chinese medicine is all about cultivating ourselves in relation to the dynamic energies that are around us. So this notion that spirit and matter are separate, it's in a minority position. Indigenous peoples understand it too. All of East Asia understands it. That's almost a third of the world's people. We
Yes.
have to incorporate larger worldviews. Sorry, Stephen, are you about to jump in?
Well, I would just agree, and I'm struck by how much ecological civilization can be a force for integrating these different components of our lives that we tend to think about separately. Our spirituality, our emotional and mental and physical well-being, what we're doing as a society, collectively, together in community, cultural values. Like it sounds like it has a real integrating potential and motivating force in that kind of way. And I wanted to begin to wrap us up here in just a moment and just echo something that Ju shared around I believe you said, even though it's difficult, people are still moving forward. I think that's beautiful, not to pretend like it's easy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It-
Not too easy. It's very difficult. But you know, uh, you can conquer that. You can get more. You know that, yeah, it's a simple, yeah, principle.
yeah,
Yeah.
through taking
And
steps together that are aligned with values of harmony, we
yeah,
can, yeah,
yeah, you know, in China, we have no just one ethnic group, not just Han. We also have other ethnic groups.
Okay.
You know, in Xinjiang, uh, lots of other different ethnic groups. They have a different culture, have a different wisdom. I have a experience working with them, and I feel they have their wisdom and also do lots of good job to protect the environment. I feel ecological civilization just not about Confucian and other religions can also develop dig their wisdom mm, uh, and use their wisdom to do lots of beautiful work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
yeah,
I think that if this wasn't in our nature as humans, it would be pointless.
Mhm.
We'd be kidding ourselves. We've kind of walked ourselves into a blind or dead end canyon. We're stuck, that's for sure. But we can walk ourselves out because we did walk in.
I love that, Peter. And I do think that despite the harrowing moment that we're living through with great dread and fear and dismay, I agree with your points made several times here, that it's also a moment, you can say break down to break through. It's going to take a lot of courage, a lot of wisdom and insight, but people have done it. Look what the abolitionists did. Look what they did in South Africa with apartheid, the incredible suffering. Look at the civil rights movement and nonviolence and anti-Vietnam War. So we can draw on the courage and examples from around the world, including the Chinese and their persistence and their pragmatism on being inspired by very rich ideas from Confucianism, Daoism, and Buddhism.
Thank you. Well put. A beautiful note to end on here too. Thank you, Mary Evelyn and Peter and Ju. Thank you so much for joining us today for such a good conversation. Thanks again to the Garrison Institute and also the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology for co-sponsoring this session today. And thank you all for joining.